Ladies, gentlemen, and adventurers of all ages, it's one of those special times in Baldurs Gate 3 where we get to talk about something exciting, and that exciting thing is patch number 3, which dropped for the game yesterday and did exactly what the developers promised it would, both fixing loads more bugs and more issues, but importantly, adding in big and incredibly useful requested features from the players, with the biggest change for most players in this patch itself being the addition of the magic mirror to the camp. This is simply an item that you can interact with from inside of your camp, and when you do, you get this lovely little menu that quite simply lets you change the visuals of your character to a pretty ridiculously significant degree. You can't change things like your race, which is fair enough really, but you can change pretty much everything up to that point, which is just so nice to actually have in-game in the middle of a playthrough. After all, you can easily get 50 hours into your playthrough, which relatively speaking is still just a dent if you're trying to experience everything the game has to offer, and then decide something about your character just isn't quite feeling right to you. Before this, your choices were to redo that 50 hours of gameplay or deal with the imperfections for the rest of your playthrough, while it slowly just bored deeper and deeper into your mind like, well, some sort of tadpole or something, maybe. But now that worry is gone completely, and it is 100% something that the fans were asking for. This wasn't something that Larian talked about doing ahead of time and then just decided to do on their own. It wasn't something they said was in the plans but just didn't make it in time for release. It wasn't something they expressed interest in doing in the slightest. This is entirely in the game today because people who are playing the game actually stopped and said, hey, is there any way that we could just add the ability to change your appearance in the future, like without restarting? And the developers did it just like that. They decided, hey, that's a good idea, and then they did it. Just a few weeks and bam, right in the game, looking like it was always meant to be where it is. That's the biggest part of this patch then for most people, with the other most major part being that the game is now officially available and fully supported on Mac, which it wasn't until this point. While it isn't really considered a gaming-focused platform, that is in fact just another platform that the game has now released on, and honestly it says a lot about how wildly successful the game is that its initial release was PC only, that it had a delayed PS5 release like a month later, and it'll still be releasing on more systems for months to come. This isn't a worldwide full all-platform release, this is a slow trickle of getting more and more people in through these various platforms, which is what makes it just so crazy that the game has done as well as it did on its initial launch in the first place. Past this, it's mostly bug fixes of various degrees, things like Grim in the Grimforge suddenly just being smart enough to try and avoid the environmental fight mechanic since the last patch, which is a bit of a whoopsie from them that has now been fixed. Some fixes to Divine Smite as well, a cool change for PS5 players where the controller will now glow in somewhat accurate colors to match elemental damage that you're using in the game, which is a really neat feature, honestly. And then our big performance note for the day is improved performance in Lower City, more to come, which actually is honestly lovely. The city definitely starts to drag a bit as far as performance goes, presumably because of the ridiculous density of, well, everything in the Lower City, so to see changes big enough to warrant this kind of section in the patch is definitely quite solid. Let us know in the comments down below if you have noticed a difference since the patch hit. Past that, we have some art changes, the biggest of which being that they made a lot of dye colors in the game more intense, brighter, and more noticeable on certain armors that were originally a bit muddy, dark, and dim before, you know, those armors that just sort of obscured the original color-based goals of the dye. They also fixed Shadowheart going blonde when equipping a hat. I think they took that the wrong way. They should have made everyone go blonde while wearing hats, claimed that the bug was the other way around, that it was only Shadowheart and that was a mistake, and that clearly in their version of this world, hats just make you blonde. That's just how it is, sorry. They also improved the reflection in the eye of the spectator in the Underdark, which is hilariously specific in the best of ways. I love that they actually care about that.
And I look at him, and he looks at me.
Then we just have a bunch of script and flow changes. This is mostly just sort of changes to certain dialogue prompts that were either triggering too easily or not easily enough. A particular highlight in my mind here is fixed issues with Asterion discussing topics that are no longer relevant, which feels more like something a therapist would write down in their notes after a long, difficult chat with him. And just the way that they word some of these patch notes, it makes me laugh quite a bit, honestly. Then we have some proper gameplay changes, with some of them being quite convenient. Another thing I'm almost certain is entirely driven by player feedback here is that using level up as a function will now level each of your characters in your party one at a time in a queue, rather than you having to go to their character page each individually to level them up one character at a time. It's a smaller detail for sure, but definitely an appreciated change. A lot of nice little changes here and there, and fixes in here, and then another gem of a patch note: reading shop signs will no longer be considered a crime. I love it. The fact that it was before, hilarious. The fact that it's not now, also hilarious. There's just such a playfulness and joviality to the way that they refer to some of these fixes, like they're just fully aware of how silly all of this would be if applied to real life. Then we've got UI changes, one of which I'm a massive fan of, which is an added option in default online settings to let you automatically listen in when another party member enters dialogue in multiplayer. The amount of times that I've been playing multiplayer in this game, someone else started a conversation and I didn't even realize for a bit because I was just in my own world, and that definitely can make you miss some otherwise important context, so I really appreciate that this is a feature now. Then just a load more smaller bug fixes, a fun little note that some of these small holes in Act 1 for tiny characters were actually maybe a little bit smaller than they were supposed to be, and the fact that sometimes the boss fight music is missing in Raphael's fight, which is an absolute travesty, as that is my favorite track in the entire game personally, so hopefully too many people haven't missed it entirely due to the bug. If you have, go listen to it now, it's totally worth the time, and thankfully said bug is now completely fixed. Then we just have some changes to the cinematics in the game, including another quality patch note, fix Shadowheart looking like she's either in pain or about to sneeze in the background of a dialogue with Thula. Again, just completely able to have a sense of humor with their bugs. I love this. That pretty heavily covers the patch, honestly. There are even more notes than these, but those are the main highlights really. Feel free to check them out properly if you want to on your own and reveal all the spoiler tags and such so you can see what they say, but for obvious reasons, I won't show what's under them on here. I don't want to spoil people unnecessarily. Outside of the patch, it's worth noting that some players of the game on PS5 have been experiencing some sudden crashes within their game over the last couple of weeks. The developers are investigating the problem on their end, but it appears to actually be related to PSN more so than the game itself, and apparently if you are having this issue, you should just sort of disconnect your PlayStation 5 from the internet while you're playing the game. Just a small PSA in case anyone watching is having these issues and hasn't seen this yet. Then we just have some tweets and such by devs of the game, most notably this lovely one from Larit Larian. Polygon reports that Microsoft completely misjudged Baldurs Gate 3, presumably leading to why the game is only going to be launched on Xbox like late this year at the soonest, rather than closer to its initial launch like a lot of its other platform releases. Sven's response to this is, I'd love to meet that analyst. And to be completely fair, while the game did have some hype in specific circles, very few people were predicting exactly what Baldur's Gate 3 would actually become on release, just the absolute masterpiece of gaming that it is. That said, to misjudge it enough to not even consider it worth keeping an eye on is maybe a bit of a misplay on the analyst there, and I'm sure Sven would be entirely just wanting to joke around with the analyst. After all, he's got nothing to prove. He's got Baldur's Gate 3 under his belt. And that's pretty much gonna do it for today, everyone. Just a simple roundup of the last week or so of news surrounding Baldur's Gate 3. It's been a relatively light week outside of some pretty obscure crashing issues for PlayStation 5 players, just a little bit of playful banter from Sven, and of course the loveliness that is the third major patch for the game post-release, including a crazy number of bug fixes, including some pretty impactful stuff, but also having a number of very notable changes that are just very clearly directly implemented from request by players themselves, which they said they would do, and it's just great to see them follow up on that promise so quickly with something as big as mid-story appearance change, and they didn't even half-ass it by any means, adding a full-on function into the camp and a full item with visuals and everything, rather than just a weird menu option somewhere in your settings. The passion and commitment that they show for this game just on repeat every day is just astounding, and I think we've only got bigger and better things coming as far as updates go for this wonderful game. I hope you've enjoyed this breakdown of the news then, and I'm sure I'll be back sooner rather than later with more as more things happen in the community. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.